the blood-soaked mining town the desert tried to forget. In the scorching desert of southern Arizona, surrounded by mountains of red rock and silence that stretches for miles, lies a ghost town with a past far darker than its abandoned buildings suggest. This is Ruby, a mining camp that rose on silver and lead, and drowned in blood. In the early 1900s, Ruby was a promising frontier settlement. Dozens of families lived here. Children played in the dust streets. Miners worked long days under the brutal sun. Merchants traded goods from Mexico and across the Southwest. It looked like any other hard-working Western town. But beneath the calm surface, something sinister was growing. A shadow that would turn Ruby into one of the most violent towns in Arizona history. Between 1920 and 1922, a series of murders shook Ruby to its core. Gunshots on empty roads, bodies disappearing into the desert, families slaughtered at their homes, bandits slipping across the border, and a sheriff's posse outmatched by ruthless killers. These weren't random acts. They were coordinated attacks. Fearsome, targeted, and unforgettable. The crimes became known as the Ruby Murders, a bloody sequence that terrified the entire region and left the town permanently scarred. People fled. Homes were abandoned. The mines shut down, and Ruby slowly died, leaving behind empty buildings, broken windows, and the ghost of terror that still lingers in the desert wind. Today, Ruby stands frozen, a silent desert valley filled with decaying structures and the memory of violence, so shocking it changed the region forever. This is the story of Ruby, Arizona, the frontier town that rose on hope and fell to murder, the silver that created Ruby. Long before Ruby became a name whispered in fear, it was simply a quiet valley in the rugged mountains of southern Arizona, a place where the desert met the sky and where the silence was broken only by the wind and the distant call of wildlife. In the 1870s, Mexican prospectors searching the area made a discovery that would change everything. Silver, not gold, but rich veins of silver were threaded through the rock, accompanied by lead and zinc. Enough to make the region valuable, enough to draw miners, enough to give birth to a town. Word spread north and south across the border. Small mining claims were established, tents appeared, and crude shafts were cut into the hillsides. The settlement didn't have a name yet, just a cluster of hopeful men chasing wealth in the unforgiving desert. But in 1891, a general store opened, run by a man named J. Ruby. It became the heart of the town. Prospectors bought supplies there. Families gathered there. Mail arrived there. News traveled through its doors. And slowly, as people referred to the settlement, they began saying, "I'm heading to Ruby's." The name stuck. The town became Ruby, a fitting title for a place carved from rock and ambition. The birth of a community. By the early 1900s, Ruby grew into a real mining town with dozens of wooden homes, a schoolhouse, a post office, a jail, stables and corrals, and a bustling main street lined with wagons and dust. Families lived here, not just miners. Children attended classes. Women ran the homes and stores. A small, tight-knit community took shape against the backdrop of desert cliffs. Life wasn't easy. Summer heat soared above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius. Winters were cold, and work in the mines was dangerous. But Ruby thrived. The Montana mine, the largest operation in the area, produced millions of dollars in valuable ore. It brought jobs, infrastructure, and hope. Investors believed Ruby might one day become a major mining center. For a moment, the future looked bright. A town too close to the border. But Ruby had one vulnerability. Its location. Just a short ride from the Mexican border, it sat on a route used by smugglers, bandits, and desperados who crossed the desert between two nations. Most passed quietly. Some caused trouble, but a few brought terror. And in 1920, Ruby would experience its first taste of true violence. A moment that seemed isolated, but would become the opening strike in a series of killings that would shake the entire region. The town didn't know it yet, but the desert was about to reveal a darker side, and Ruby's peaceful days were running out. The first murders, the Pearson family tragedy. The violence that would one day define Ruby began quietly, without warning, without witnesses, and without mercy. On a cold morning in February 1920, townspeople noticed something strange at the Pearson Ranch, a small homestead just outside Ruby. The property, usually alive with movement, was silent. No smoke rose from the chimney. The horses were unattended, and the store, operated by Frank and Myrtle Pearson, hadn't opened. Concerned neighbors approached. What they found would mark the beginning of Ruby's darkest chapter. Inside the small, dusty home lay the bodies of Frank Pearson and his wife Myrtle. They had been shot, executed with brutal precision. The crime scene was disturbing. Supplies taken from a store, horses missing, footprints leading south toward the border. No signs of struggle. O no surviving witnesses. The killers had moved with confidence and familiarity. This wasn't random violence. It was targeted, calculated, cold. Ruby was shaken. The Pearsons had been well-liked, known for their kindness and hospitality. Their deaths sent shockwaves through the community. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed the couple had been robbed. Others thought it was a dispute gone wrong. But a few whispered something more chilling. It wasn't robbery. It was a message. The sheriff organized a posse to track the killers. They found clues, hoof prints, rumors of riders heading toward Mexico. But no one was captured. And Ruby tried, somehow, to move on. But the desert wasn't finished. Not yet. Because 2 years later, in nearly the same place, the killers returned. The Fraser Murders. On August 1922, the Pearson tragedy repeated itself, this time even more violently. The Fraser family had taken over the same property. Otto and Maud Fraser worked the land and ran the small store, hoping to build a new life in the quiet valley. But one afternoon, neighbors once again noticed something wrong. No one at the pumps, no one at the counter, and the front door slightly open. Inside, they found a scene even worse than before. Otto Fraser shot dead. Maud Fraser murdered. Supplies stolen. Evidence of a swift, ruthless attack. Again, tracks leading toward the Mexican border. The similarities were undeniable. The killings were nearly identical. Same location, same method, same cold precision. Ruby understood. The town was being hunted. Fear gripped the community. Families locked their doors. Men carried rifles even in daylight. The school considered closing. The Montana mine increased security, worried that bandits might target payroll shipments. The law was desperate. Sheriffs, deputies, U.S. Marshals all struggled to track the killers. But the desert is vast. The border is porous, and the men responsible seemed to vanish into the mountains like ghosts. Ruby began losing something far more precious than silver or lead, its sense of safety. And just when it seemed the violence could not escalate further, it did. The manhunt, chasing the killers across the desert. By late 1922, fear had transformed Ruby from a hopeful mining town into a fortified outpost. Families slept with rifles within arm's reach. Children were kept indoors. Every unfamiliar rider was watched. Every noise in the night caused lanterns to flicker on. The murders of the Pearsons and the Frasers were too similar to ignore. Everyone understood the truth. The same killers had returned, and they were not finished. A desperate search begins. Local lawmen, overwhelmed and outmatched, called for help. Deputies from Tucson and Nogales joined the hunt. U.S. Marshals sent reinforcements. Mexican authorities were notified. The killers were believed to be a group of outlaws led by Manuel Martínez, a dangerous gunman connected with cross-border banditry. The chase was brutal. Posse riders followed hoofprints for miles across jagged ridges, through blistering canyons, and into thick desert brush. They crossed dry riverbeds, climbed rocky passes, and slept under the open sky, always aware that the men they hunted were armed, experienced, and unpredictable. Witnesses along the border reported seeing unfamiliar riders, armed, aggressive, moving fast toward Mexico. Others spoke of stolen horses, broken fences, abandoned campsites. But the desert protects those who know it well. The killers slipped through ravines and into mountain shadows, vanishing whenever the law drew near. A break in the case. The manhunt dragged on for months. Then, in 1923, investigators finally caught a break. A rancher reported stolen horses matching the Fraser's team. Tracks led south, toward a remote canyon known only to smugglers and bandits. Inside the canyon, the posse found pieces of the Fraser's belongings, ammunition, scraps of clothing, and footprints converging toward the border. The killers were close. News spread quickly through Ruby. They've found the trail. They're closing in. The tension in town grew even heavier. Miners sharpened their tools into weapons. Merchants barricaded their shops at night. The schoolhouse reinforced its doors. The community lived in a state of suspended breath. The standoff. Finally, deep in the desert near the Mexican border, lawmen cornered a group of suspects. Shots were fired. Horses panicked. Dust exploded into the air. Gunfire echoed through the canyon. Some suspects were killed. Others escaped. But one man, Manuel Martínez himself, was captured alive. He was injured, exhausted, and out of options. Under interrogation, he denied everything. Then he admitted small details. Then he changed his story. Then he implicated others. But one truth became impossible to ignore. Martínez had been at the Pearson home. He had been at the Fraser home. He had led the attacks. It was the confirmation Ruby had waited years to hear. The trials. Martínez and several accomplices were taken to Tucson for trial, a huge event in the early history of Arizona law enforcement. Crowds filled the courthouse. Reporters covered every detail. Witnesses testified, some trembling, some furious. The crimes horrified the public. The verdicts were swift and severe. Convicted. Sentenced. Justice delivered. For Ruby, the terror finally ended. But the damage was already done. The murders had shattered the community's spirit. Families moved away. Merchants closed shop. The mine struggled to retain workers. Investment dried up. Ruby didn't die in one moment. It bled out slowly, wounded by violence, drained by fear, and ultimately abandoned to the desert. The slow death of Ruby. How a town fades after fear. When the trials ended and the killers were finally behind bars, Ruby should have been able to breathe again. The threat was gone. Justice had been served. Families no longer feared footsteps in the dark or the sound of approaching horses. But peace did not bring Ruby back to life. For many, it was already too late. A community too deeply wounded. The murders had shaken the town's foundations. People no longer felt safe. Parents didn't want their children growing up in a place marked by blood and tragedy. Merchants worried about being isolated in the desert with little protection. Entire families packed their belongings and left, seeking stability in towns like Nogales, Tucson, or Bisbee. Those who remained worked harder, but the sense of community, the trust that held Ruby together, had cracked beyond repair. The mine struggled to keep workers. Supplies became harder to bring in. Businesses closed one by one. Ruby didn't fall all at once. It simply began to drift into silence. The decline of the Montana mine. The Montana mine had been Ruby's lifeblood. As long as or came out of the hills, the town had a purpose. But by the late 1930s, the mine was facing increasing challenges. Falling prices, costly operations, global economic downturn, aging equipment, difficulty retaining workers. Then came the final blow. In 1940, mining operations ceased. The pumps stopped, machinery went quiet, and the tunnels filled with darkness. Without the mine, there was no reason for Ruby to exist. The last days of a desert town. One by one, families locked their doors for the last time. The school closed. The sheriff's office emptied. The general store, once the heart of the community, shut its windows and fell silent. By 1941, Ruby was almost entirely abandoned. Wind blew dust down empty streets. Boarded-up homes creaked under the desert sun. The mine's head frame stood like a skeleton against the sky. Ruby was no longer a town. It was a memory, a ghost town preserved. But unlike many lost settlements of the Old West, Ruby didn't disappear completely. The dry desert air preserved its buildings. The schoolhouse, the jail, the general store, miners' cabins, rusting mining equipment, wooden walkways baked by the sun. Today, Ruby is considered one of the best preserved ghost towns in the American Southwest. Visitors who walk its dusty roads feel a strange mixture of peace and unease. A quiet landscape holding the shadows of a violent past. You can still stand at the Pearson and Fraser home sites. You can still see the mine tunnels carved into the hills. You can still hear the wind sliding between old wooden boards, whispering the story of a town that lived, prospered, suffered, and vanished. Ruby didn't just fade because of economics or isolation. It died because fear hollowed out its heart, and the desert claimed the rest. The ghost that remains, Ruby today. Today, Ruby lies in a quiet desert valley, surrounded by rugged mountains and silence that feels almost supernatural. The violence is gone. The people are gone, but the town still stands. The buildings rise like skeletons of another century. The weathered schoolhouse with sunlight cutting through broken windows. The jail, its metal bars rusted but intact. The general store where the Pearsons once worked. Cabins collapsing slowly into the earth. Machinery frozen in time, still coated with desert dust. Ruby is no longer a place of fear, but a haunting reminder of how quickly hope can turn to tragedy. When visitors walk its abandoned streets, they feel the weight of the past. The silence is deeper here, as if the town itself remembers what happened. Even the wind seems to move differently, softly, respectfully, through the fragile remains of human life. The Pearson Murders, the Fraser Murders, the manhunt across the border, the trials that captivated Arizona, the slow, painful collapse that followed. Every event left a mark. Ruby is not just a ghost town. It is a preserved crime scene from another era, a rare place where the Old West, the violence of the 1920s, and the unforgiving desert come together in a single story. A story of ambition, community, fear, and disappearance. Standing here, you can almost imagine the voices of families who once lived in these homes. Laughter, conversations, dreams, all swallowed by time. Ruby reminds us that no town is guaranteed a future. Prosperity can be fragile. Safety can disappear. And a single violent moment can echo for generations. Today, the desert keeps Ruby safe, protecting it from development, preserving its buildings, holding its history in place. And for those who visit, Ruby offers a rare experience. A step back into a world where the West was still wild, where justice rode on horseback, where danger crossed borders in the night, and where a single valley witnessed enough violence to haunt it forever. Ruby stands as one of America's most powerful ghost towns, a place where the past never fully left. It is quiet, it is still, but its story continues to live.